Okay, welcome everybody on YouTube. Thanks for joining today. We're just going to get started in just a moment. Just waiting for a couple of things to kick in here. Things are looking good there. Okay, happy Friday. Welcome everybody. Nice bright sunny day here in Thunder Bay, Ontario, where it's finally getting a little bit like winter or maybe late fall. We've had a really great fall until now, and finally got some hard freezing temperatures last night for the first time. It's been wonderful weather otherwise. So today we're going to look at grade 3 mosaics, our first peek at the music inside that, and I'm going to play through all the group 1 repertoire, which is baroque and classical style repertoire. And thanks for joining me here today. If anyone has any questions as I'm going along here that's live in the Zoom audience, go ahead and throw those in the chat box, and hopefully I'll see those pop up. And feel free to let me know if my audio is not to your liking or something's not right when I start playing in a little bit. So far I'm happy with what's coming out on the YouTube, but I've made some additional adjustments here to try and fine tune how that audio is sounding for you after the fact and here live. So a couple announcements. Next week there'll be no webinar. We're going to take next Friday off. Friday the 15th, I'm going to go through grade 3 group 2 repertoire, the contemporary stuff. And then November 22nd also we'll take off because we're going to have our annual convocation ceremony online this year on Saturday, November 23rd. That'll be a good hour and a half. We're going to read through all of the award winners, scholarship winners. We're going to probably talk with a couple of our students, talk with a couple of teachers, examiners, and hear some performances. We're planning some live performances from students from their home studios across the country. So it'll be a nice way to gather and celebrate those. We've started sending out award winners letters and scholarship letters to students and teachers here this past week. And so I know those of you in Western Canada should see those first. And I think we're working our way east next week. So by next Friday, all award winners should be contacted and you'll know if your students have won. I know some of you here in the Zoom room, I've seen your name come across my spreadsheets here in the last couple of weeks in terms of having award winners. So congratulations to all the teachers out there. You're going to find out very shortly who those award winners are from your studios. And we look forward to celebrating that on Saturday, November 23rd, starting at 1:00 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on the CCTV YouTube channel. There'll be no Zoom link for that one. There'll be Zoom only for those participants that are joining as panelists, but anyone can watch that live or on replay on the YouTube channel. And I hope you are checking out the YouTube channel for all the replays here. We had a really great webinar there last week and the week before. And then coming up after the 23rd's convocation on, I guess it's going to be November 29th, Friday, November 29th. Let me just make sure that day's right. Yeah, 29th. We're going to have Dr. Erin Parks back. We had her on last week talking about working with neurodivergent students and students with exceptionalities. She gave us a broad overview. I'd encourage you to check that out. Really great ideas there, but she's going to go into more detail on working with autistic students on November 29th. And then she has other ideas for other webinars in the new year as well to help us out with those students that we're starting to see in increasing numbers in our studio. And I know a number of you have been asking about what we can do with those students. So we're hoping to provide you more information on that. And then into December, hopefully we'll have grade 4 mosaics ready so I can start playing through that repertoire for you. Probably not until December 13th. And on December 6th, we're going to have Olivia Riddell here for Music for Young Children to provide a special session on the value-added education that their program can offer you and your students, teaching group settings, early music for young children. Today we're looking at Mosaics 3, and I've just received word that this is now in the hands of the publisher this morning. So Andrew at Deborah Wanless Music is going to put this up for sale probably today, maybe Monday. We'll see how it goes, but I would start even checking as early as later today. I'll just show you where to find that now. He's decided to stream or put all sales onto the andrewharbridge.com, or no, sorry, away from andrewharbridge.com and just onto the Deborah Wanless Music site. So I'm just going to share my screen for a second here. And we're going to go over to here. If you get to deborahwanlessmusic.com, see right at the very top is a nice Mosaics banner. And you can get to this two ways. You can look at two ways. You can look at the new products here below where you can see prep grade 1 and grade 2 available. They're going to have grade 3 maybe later today, maybe by Monday, but it is available shortly here for order. Or you can go to the top, click on series, and top left Mosaics appears there. And then you can see the books there for order. So grade 3, grade 4 hopefully coming by the end of the year here, and then we get into grade 5 and 8 in the new year. So that's sort of the timeline that we're looking at. Now, I'm just going to get my screen ready here to show you the grade 3 book. I've shown you the cover already, so I'm just going to present this a little bit more coherently so you can see my screen, etc. And then we're going to dive into this grade 3 book. And I know you're all curious to see what music we have offered for you there. Okay, so if I expand this out here, here's our title page. Again, we have credits in the middle there. I've talked about the forward here that we've offered you, talking about the editing. I mentioned all that before. The fact that this will be available as well in the SuperScore app, actually it probably is already for those of you that have SuperScore app on the iPad. It's a free download from Time Warp Technologies through the App Store for iPad only. You download the SuperScore app for free, and then you can purchase your copy of the Mosaics books as well as any other publications. They have such a vast library repertoire. We're thrilled to be a part of their app now, finally, after many years of discussion, now that we have this new series. Here's a table of contents here, what we're going to go through today in terms of group 1. Again, this is Baroque and classical style. I believe we have 5 Baroque pieces in here, the balance being classical. And when we get to grade 3, we think about, to me, those first sonatinas. And students love them, these running 8th notes, all sorts of exciting styles. So I'm going to play through most of those today for you so you can hear it. I'm going to skip 1 or 2 pieces as we go in the interest of time, and also in the interest of my hands. There's a few things that are quite tricky, but I haven't had time to quite master on a couple of them, so I may decide to do that. You can also see quickly there the group 2 repertoire that we're going to get into starting in 2 weeks' time on Friday, November 15th. Okay, so first piece up here is an air in C major, attributed to John Blow, a British composer, but in fact is anonymous. It's a really simple air. I'd say barely at the grade 3 level, perhaps a really good place to start. The tricky thing here is in the left hand, there are some layered voices here where we've got tenor and bass voices holding over top of each other. And I find grade 3 is the perfect place to sort of introduce that, the fact that sometimes we have to hold notes, and it's kind of like an organ technique, I feel, in the left hand. I try to take this one a little bit slower. It's tempting to play it quick, but because it's an air, we can assume it's more of a song that needs breath and time between the phrases. And it's marked andantino, which I think is suitable for this one. I'm going to try and add some dynamics as well. Really great piece to warm up with and get your students going, I think, at the grade 1 level. So I'm just going to alter my audio here for a moment. So my spoken voice is going to be a little quieter going forward, but you're going to be able to hear the piano quite nicely, I'm hoping. Short and sweet, again trying to layer the left-hand voices together there by playing those held notes properly and held, and trying to get some dynamics, but mostly about the right hand and trying to project and get these phrases. They're rather short phrases, so lots of lifts between phrases, and I think following the dynamics would be, or sorry, the articulation markings, especially the staccato on the right hand, will be quite effective for students in performance. So let's go to Minuet in G minor. A rather popular piece, really. We haven't featured it in any of the Conservatory Canada or Western Ontario Conservatory music books for quite a long time. And it originally attributed to Bach. Nowadays, the modern scholarship says this was probably written more by Christian Petzold, one of his students. And it's a really great example if we go back and think about the articulation I talked about back in grade 1, how we're trying to influence and think about Baroque articulation with violin bowings. The bow changes direction often. There's a lot of lifts in there because the bow is of a certain shape and the strings are of a certain shape on the string instruments that allow for time and space between notes and between short phrases. And the basic idea is that quicker notes are joined together legato, and the closer notes are together, the more they can be legato. Notes that are longer values and separated from each other are going to have spaces between them. So you'll hear that dialect in my right hand as well as the left hand. It's best not to think of these left hand dotted half notes as simply held for 3 beats and join slurred right into the next one, but usually we would play that as a continual part, where the left hand might get 2 beats with a quarter rest. And so you'll hear my left hand lifting prematurely quite often to imitate that continual group, which in a baroque ensemble would be harpsichord playing with a bass instrument like a cello. And so we're imitating that cello string, giving space between the notes. All this space between the notes allows for a transparent texture so that you can hear all the parts clearly, and that's how those old instruments work. When we transfer this music to the modern piano, it can be quite problematic. It can get too thick if we just play everything legato as we would on a harpsichord. The texture is totally different. Things get washed out. We can't hear the 2 parts. It's really important to hear definition in the left hand as well, because it's treated almost as an equal. On the piano, we have to make these adjustments, and so you'll hear me doing that along here. I won't take the repeats today or add any ornamentation. And there's the second page, but you'll look at that later. I won't be able to turn pages in between. So this is this minuet in G minor. Quite famous piece really, but we're happy to finally offer this in the Conservatory Canada books. So again, lots of short lifts. I'm rolling the chord at the end a little bit as a harpsichord player would. Trying to add lots of audible gestures in these short phrases. Always have something going here. Listening to that left hand, trying to bring the left hand out as an equal in places, I think is really important and adds to the style, I think, of this baroque music. Very extravagant, very ornamented. And you can see throughout our books where there's little holes, we sometimes offer these quotes from famous composers. There are and will be 1,000 princes. There is only one Beethoven. And that's Beethoven speaking about himself, which is quite interesting. Let's go on now to a classical piece. This is more of an etude, or a classical study, of which we stopped publishing studies with this series. We don't delineate studies. We've taken that out of our syllabus as of 2018. But this would be a classical study. Henry Bertini. Students love playing this piece. I think it's really neat. It's a good way to practice double thirds, going 1 3 2 4 1 3 2 4 all the way up, and a really interesting fingering coming down that you can see we've marked there. I'm going to probably just end up playing this a little too fast or a little faster than you hear most students play it, but still very effective and captures allegro. The reason I do that is because when you get to the second half, he kind of just runs out of, not really runs out of ideas here, but he's just creating harmony, this harmony vibration. The emphasis really is in the left hand by the time you get to the third line, because the right hand's just vibrating on the same 2 notes over and over again, outlining a chord. And so for me to sustain some kind of line in those long left-hand notes takes a certain amount of speed before we'll hear length of the line. So that's why I generally play this one a little on the fast side. Again, if anyone in the live audience, if you're not hearing me clearly or the music clearly, please let me know in the chat box so I can adjust. So a little bit difficult to pull off technically, really good technical exercise. And you can hear in the second half, I'm trying to highlight that left hand. A little bit of pedal, especially in the second half, helps to blend things together. And I'm being really careful at the end in the last line. You've got all this rests, all the rests here. That's what I do is I play those chords into the pedal and release my hands and allow the pedal to finish. So you get a little bit of reverb, a little bit of warmth, and a little bit of color on those chords. I think is really important to help them blend. Some people may even hold that pedal for 2 full beats instead of just 1 beat as printed. One thing I wouldn't do probably is hold all the way through. That's more of a romantic pedaling, to pedal through rests. But that gives you a little idea of how that piece goes. I think students will find it fun and attractive to challenge themselves technically. And then we move on to this gavotte, another of the Baroque pieces here. This is by Handel, arranged by Andrew Harbridge. He's done some editing on this one. This one's actually quite difficult. I have to remember to hold back my tempo, not only because it's a gavotte, but it's hard to understand really where this came from in terms of gavotte style. The tricky thing are the double stops in the right hand. Double stops referring to string playing again, where you have to do these drop lifts with two notes at one time. And I think for grade 3 this is going to be a little bit difficult, but not quite ready for grade 4, and yet it's really an attractive piece, especially by the time you get to the end. There's a lot of variety here, lots of continual left hand that's going to be mostly detached, lots of leaps there to consider. So I'm trying to imitate a cello, but most of the work is these two note slurs in the right hand, using my arm and my wrist to drop lift these to get the inflection just right. So this is the gavotte in G major. So again, a little bit difficult. I probably wouldn't give this to a grade 3 student right away and spend a lot of time drilling this right hand in terms of how that works and how supple that wrist and the arm can work. Because as I'm drop lifting each one in that articulation of those two note slur double stops, I also want to crescendo and get a little bit louder, sometimes diminuendo as you heard there. Okay, let's go to the next piece. This is an Écossaise Scottish dance by Beethoven. The accents, SFs, are kind of interesting. I try not to get too loud on those. Those are just points of focus where you can feel like a strong downbeat. Each one has to build. It's a little tricky in E flat major. You can see we haven't added too much fingering here because I think what works for me is just getting E flat major with my thumb on the E flat and building a pentascale up from there. So you'll see me up on the black keys if you can see my hands actually, probably not because I'm so small, my screen sharing. Here's the second page, but I have found the fingering that works best is to have my thumb on the E flat in most of the passages here, and then things tend to work. It's a little bit clumsy, but using a typical E flat major scale fingering doesn't quite work the way this melody is shaped. I'm going to try and highlight the dynamics as well, but again, it's the treatment of the sforzandos I think that's key, making sure they're not too heavy, yet we have some emphasis there. So a little bit of a tricky piece, great for grade 3. I think students are really going to love it when they hear it. It'll be an easy sell in my studio. I'm sure when I play this, a lot of people are going to want to do it. Beethoven has a number of these sort of sailor coastal inspired, sailors on boats and things, and he has those kind of inspired melodies. And a lot of them are in E flat major now that I think about it, or C minor. And so this would be one of those ones I think would be quite popular. This comes from the Time Warp Technologies library in Superstore. And so that's who's done the editing there. Then we move into the first of our sonatinas. The classical sonatinas were a real mainstay of any grade 3 book, and we were very careful at trying to source things that were a little off the beaten path with a couple of things that are more familiar, but with little twists to them. And so this first one by Albert Biel, a good classical composer, giving us really effective classical style. Lots of little 16ths, but more of the running 8ths in this one. Lots of articulation. Left hand with some simple broken chordal patterns. Not much in terms of Alberti bass. The second page gets a little tighter with these interesting 16th notes. And of course, students are going to want to play it quick. I'll try and play it on the quick side today as well. Your fingering has to be just spot on with very short fingers and short staccatos here to balance things. Okay, so a little bit of a tricky piece, great for grade 3. I think students are really going to want to do it. Beethoven has a number of these sort of sailor coastal inspired, you know, sailors on boats and things, and he has those kind of inspired melodies. And a lot of them are in E flat major now that I think about it, or C minor. And so this would be one of those ones I think would be quite popular. This comes from the Time Warp Technologies library in Superstore. And so that's who's done the editing there. thing as I was playing this too. I'm trying to remember what it was now as I got into it. Oh yeah, the technique in terms of balance. Right hand we want a little bit louder, the left hand we want very much in the background. And sometimes for students in the young hand, it's hard for them to bounce back and forth to the speed that they want in the right hand and keep this left hand nice and clear without getting too loud. And so what I'm trying to show students to do is really lean on that right hand in a way that produces probably double the volume that you would have in the left hand, regardless of how loud it is, so that the right hand projects. The quieter the left hand can be, the better. But especially for those students doing an exam online, which 65% of students or so are choosing to do their exam online. The information is going through a small microphone. We're finding that things really balance well when we get that left hand out of the way and push that right hand sound out quite a bit more. Helps us when we're listening through these small microphones these days, listening through small speakers. The examiner will be able to hear with a little bit more clarity. So it's something I'm thinking about a lot today too. What environment am I playing in? How careful and how clearly I have to balance things depending on who's listening. Again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to throw those in the chat box, those of you that are here live in the Zoom room. Okay, another Baroque piece. Really happy to offer this piece by Elisabetta de Gamberini, a Baroque woman composer. Most of her music until now has not been published or more or less suppressed or forgotten. So it's great to offer this minuet in A major from her Opus 2, number 5. A major, a little bit tricky for students. I think there are some tricky things here, but fits nicely into the grade 3 level and is a great piece to start them thinking about A major. Really tuneful, left hand, all these things that we're talking about with Bach and other Baroque composers, Handel, Couperin, we're going to listen to later today too, where you have this continual playing in the left hand slightly detached, right hand with short slurs, and depending on how far the notes are apart, I'm going to join some of them. I think the editing here is pretty good. A lot of the times you'll see no slurs there, and so you're free to add your own. So listen to my model here, and you can decide for yourselves what makes the most sense for your students in terms of the Baroque dialect. Andante grazioso, I'm going to try and make this graceful. I'm going to try and hold back my tempo to a real minuet tempo here so that I don't get too far ahead of myself. So you can hear all the nice tight articulation work there, being really tidy with the dance steps. And we'll relate that to some other minuets here later. By Mozart, the next one. So more classical style, same idea with the minuet. Maybe this one's going to go a little bit quicker than the last one because we have a lot of eighth notes here. The texture in the left hand is simpler in some ways in that we're just outlining chords. I think about a lot of detail in this left hand where I've got these kind of Alberti bass textures. It's nice to see them here just in eighth notes for students. In 3/4 time, maybe a little bit more difficult because you have to go. Because the thumb is on A repeatedly, I tell students or coach them in a way that gets them to play that A quieter than the lower notes. So you hear a lot of and not so much of the A. So you'll hear me trying to do that in the left hand, really listening to my left hand closely, but projecting right hand. So there's a lot of detail in Mozart. This is a great piece to bring out that detail. One of his very earliest compositions, he was probably writing at age 5 or something like that. So I hope you enjoy this. I'm going to go through without repeats and just listen to that left hand detail with the phrasing, very clear structures, 4 and 2 bar phrases in the right hand. last line where we've got a forte mark there, I more or less leave the forte up to the right hand. Really try and get that right hand out there, keeping the left hand very much out of the way. So in classical music, I don't want to be too heavy. I don't want to get too much resonance going. So I use the right hand in my ability to play the right hand legato to force that dynamic change out there, because to hear that dynamics between light and dark is really important in classical music. I'm fudging a little bit with the pedal in the background. I know I say this every week, but there's little things I'm doing there. I probably wouldn't let a student do that unless they were really advanced. You know, we wanted to get them into the 90% range on the piece because they were ready or we had time to do that. And I've talked about that pacing before. I'll mention that later. But in this piece, more or less, there's too much going on. I don't want the students using pedal here because you're going to ruin the classical texture, especially if they want to just put it down and hold it for a whole bar. That's the kind of thing we want to avoid in this type of music. Okay, another sonatina, this one by Alexander Godike. Really interesting. Again, light and dark. Light and dark is really important in classical music, as well as balance of form. So a couple of things come to mind. Back in this time period, we're thinking 1720, pre-classical period. You know, classical music itself gets refined between 1780 and 1810, really. And so the idea of light and dark you can see in the visual arts, or where you've got paintings where you've got light cast on dark sides of the canvas, that kind of thing. And even decorating and other aesthetics of the time, you can see things are always really orderly and balanced. If someone had a living room with a table set up, the table would look symmetrical with decorations on either side of it. Everything was decorated that way. With students, when it comes to the sonatinas in grade 3, I usually put some words on the score for them, because even in these simple sonatinas that only have one theme, we can still use these words: exposition, development, recapitulation, or beginning, middle, end. And the beginning and the end are the same. They need to understand, I think, at this level, the beginnings of how this works and what a sonatina is. A sonatina is just simply something cast in an exposition, development, recapitulation type of form. In this piece, you can see, I would say the exposition is the whole first page, really, followed by a little bit of development there. I'm just looking here again to remember. Well, it's a little hard in this one, actually, now that I look at it. We just have two real themes that bounce back and forth. I'm just taking another look. And you know, I might actually refrain on this one from marking those words in, because there's no clear development to me. We've got a main theme in line 1, a sort of secondary theme in line 2. We repeat theme 1, and we'll sort of repeat theme 1 again, but in a different arrangement. What's actually the same as the beginning. Yeah, this one I'd have to consider. This one, to me, doesn't quite fit that mold as some of the other ones later on. We'd have to really consider the mold. That's the thing with the grade 3 sonatinas. Some of them fit into this really clear exposition, development, recap in a very basic way that gives those students those names and that structure. This one perhaps doesn't quite. If anyone has any ideas, throw them in the chat box for me as I play through this. I'll leave the first page up there, and I'll let us look at the second page later when we get there. Character, you can sort of see there perhaps that third line is kind of like a development in a way, and then we do a recap in the fourth line to the finish with a little coda starting at bar 21. I think a case could be made for that. The big thing is hearing beginning, middle, end, and the beginning and the end are more or less the same. Or maybe someone could make a case that this is almost like a rondo. Ignace Paderewski here. If I miss 1 day of practice, I notice it. If I miss 2 days, the critics notice it. If I miss 3 days, the audience notices it. That's so true in some ways. Now, going here to a minuet by Haydn. Of course, classical music we define generally as Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven. We feature all three here in grade 3, which is really great. We've got another piece by Haydn later on. Lots of minuets, and again, this left-hand texture of beginnings of Alberti bass shows up in this one. Lots of different articulation. The right hand is expected to move through broken chords a little bit more, which is kind of exciting. We get a nice minuet, I think, a nice classical style where the phrasing is really clear and simple, easy to follow. Pretty straightforward, really. Just follow the articulation, nice steady tempo. And then Passepied, our final Baroque piece for today. This is by Francois Couperin, a French harpsichordist. Nice to feature some of his music here. The Passepied, more of a rare dance in some ways, but it was thought of back then in the Baroque period as more of an extension of the minuet. A little bit faster, usually in 3/8, but with a lot of the same dance steps that the minuet featured, where the woman would be doing lots of toe pointing and also tracing these designs with the toe of her foot. And so here, and those were usually done in 2-bar units. So here you can see these little 2-bar units of different designs that kind of repeat themselves. So similar to a minuet, I might take this one a little bit quicker than Andantino, but a slower tempo is totally fine with this. The 3/8 indication, which makes me feel like I want 1 per bar, a lot of 16th notes there. That's what feels like gives me the license to play it a little bit quicker to capture some of the character there. Satisfying conclusion, a little bit difficult in those last 2 bars, so a little bit of relaxation helps that technique, but lots of really neat ideas here, really ornamented, really great idea or example of French Baroque music. And again, the articulation reflects that. The 16th notes can be all slurred, and then in the 8th notes, the farther they are apart, the more we detach them. And it's written in such a way where usually beat 3 gets plucked almost every time. Okay, this one we've published recently. This one gets published a lot, this Sonatina in C by Clementi, but the reason we wanted to go back to it in this repertoire series is because we had George Lythurst and Dr. Arthur Uhl on last year, a little over a year ago now, to do a webinar on Clementi and the revisions that he undertook to the Opus 36 sonatinas. And what it was roughly, their research shows that it was about the 7th edition really of Clementi sonatinas, and it was done with considerable improvements, and that's why you see that subtitle at the top. And the considerable improvements, they made a really great case in their webinar and in Dr. Arthur Uhl's research that this was something that Clementi had undertaken because those sonatinas had lived for quite a while, and he always thought they could be improved because his pianos were changing. He was a piano salesman and spent a lot of money investing and selling pianos through his piano company. And so we also heard Dr. Elaine Keeler in Ottawa, who, by the way, is going to do a couple of webinars for us later in the new year, playing on her forte piano. But we heard her do a webinar 2 years ago now, roughly, where she played her forte piano and played some music of Clementi. And Clementi's idea was that his new keyboards had more range. And so you'll see a lot of his considerable improvements, and you'll hear them here. I'll play through this. This is using that latest 7th edition, where the right hand suddenly goes an octave higher, and there's some other decorations and things he wanted to do to enhance some of these movements. And so throughout the series, through grades 3 and 4 anyway, maybe even grade 5, we're going to see a couple of these movements. Some of them we've formerly published, and you're going to hear some twists and turns from the usual. And so we'd like to sanction these and get these out there a little bit more because they're largely ignored, largely unplayed, largely unpublished in these type of versions. But certainly Dr. Arthur Uhl makes a great case for their inclusion, I think. So this is that Opus 36 number 1 in C major, first movement. Exposition, development, recapitulation is very clear. We have repeat dots here showing us where the recap is. The development Lasts about 8 measures. You get this dominant pedal section, 2-3 bars before the recap starts in measure 24. Very, very clear. So I put those words right on the score for the students so they can start to understand those formal divisions and what really makes a sonatina hold together in terms of its structure. Very bright, lively. I play it probably faster than most would, especially students. But I'm looking at Allegro and I'm also looking at the cut time indications. We really want it to feel like 2 beats per bar. And so I almost think of those 8th notes as 16th notes. So that's partly why I take it a little bit quicker. Lots of fun in this one. You can hear some of the twists and turns. Those of you that have taught this in the past, there's a couple of neat things there. Moving that right hand an octave higher, and he changes shape, adding a little bit more texture with some octaves in the left hand. Really nice for a grade 3. I probably wouldn't give this to them right away in grade 3, but once they develop a little bit into it as one of the final pieces. We also have the second movement of that particular sonatina here. Cast in F major. Also some improvements, mostly from Clementi's idea of just getting the right hand an octave higher to explore that upper register of his newer modern piano by this time, which had become more resonant and a little bit more clear. So I'll play through this as well. I think the key with this is to monitor the tempo, more andante, and showing students that it's a second movement. A second movement is reflexively quite a bit slower than the first. So I'm going to try and do my best to honor that. And the other improvement that Clementi made from time to time in these sonatina movements of Opus 36 were the pedal indications here and there, using the knee pedal that they would have had access to on the old forte piano. You can see at the beginning pedal marking and the start. He would hold the pedal down for the first 7 beats there inclusive. So I'll try and do that as well. Okay, so here we are, the second movement. I will leave, you know what, I'll do this one. I'll leave the second page up for you to see, and I'll start from the beginning, of course. So that's the second movement there from that Clementi sonatina. Structure's a little bit looser. I haven't thought about this, but usually the second movement we'll just see a simple ABA. And then we get this scherzo, Carl Maria von Weber. This is a really exciting piece. Again, in 3/8 time, lots of 16th notes, scherzo, which means playfully, jokingly. Easy to get carried away with this. I usually play this one way too fast, so I'm going to try and hold back a little bit so I'm a little bit coherent with it. But it's one I think when students get the hang of it, they're going to want to race through to make it as exciting as possible. Left hand I try to keep very light, especially if I'm playing online, forcing that right hand out. The right hand's going to carry the dynamics so my left hand doesn't get too noisy. Very light bounces. I would try and coach students to play these left hand chords almost piano, if not pianissimo. Tricky part is when you get to the bottom of the first page, this interesting second theme where you get these right hand legato dotted quarter note chords. I want to play them legato. It carries into the top of the next page and the bottom of the second page before a da capo, and I'll do the repeat. Very tricky to try sustain this right hand almost like an organ, while the left hand has these short lifts in the bass, which I find really fascinating. So I try to favor, for a student, I would say, let's get that left hand articulation more pronounced, and if the right hand's not quite joined, that's okay. I'm going to try and do it all today. I'm going to try and join these right hand chords, a little bit of pedal tricks, while getting these left hand lifts in there, and we'll see if I can pull that off here. I wouldn't expect students to be able to do that though, and I'll leave this first page up for your eyes here now. Really difficult, lots of articulation there, lots of excitement. Difficult to get all the notes today for me. This is the Voce by Haydn, 2/4 time, very lively. This is one I'm going to pass over today. It's a great piece. I just don't want to make a mess of it today, I'll be honest. 2 pages long, lots of articulation, lots of 2-note slurs. Really, really lots of fun with a rousing conclusion. Those of you that stay in the Zoom room, I may be, if you want to twist my arm and really want to hear it, I may play it later for you offline. And then we get another sonatina. Nice to provide something by Beethoven in a sonatina. Fairly clear in terms of the structure here, although it's, you know, sort of a premature kind of sonata form. In this one, we'll see an exposition. We'll see what we could call the development in the middle that has repeat dots between it, followed by this interesting coda. But I see actually the recap coming at the top of the second page, and then the repeat goes back to the beginning of maybe what we call the second theme. Hard to say because it's a sonatina. It's not a clear-cut exposition with 2 themes and a bridge in between, closing section. You know, those bigger forms we'll get into by the time we get to the grade 6 material. But here, a little bit more disjointed, but still the idea that we have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in this one, we get a special coda. And starting at measure 25, I like to hold the pedal through a fair bit of this, the first 4 or 5 bars of it, you know, even 8 bars, pedaling through, more layered pedaling, just because there are no passing notes or non-chord tones. They're all chord tones, and so we could change the color a bit and get students to start thinking orchestrally about Beethoven, because that's how he was thinking. We believe that he always had the orchestra in mind at the piano. He makes us do difficult things with our hands, but he doesn't care about the piano. He's thinking orchestra and trying to make the piano do that. And so I think the pedal at the end is a great way to start to achieve that. So this is the first movement of the sonata in G. Too excited at the finish because it's just the first movement, a little bit more feminine in character, I think, this one, and some of the sonatina themes. This one's nice and relaxed in a way. You can hear I'm a bit undecided about the grace notes. I've been playing it a lot with the grace notes on the beat lately, and as I think about it, I want to get out of that habit. I think it sounds better when they're slightly ahead of the beat, and that's typically how we would play Beethoven grace notes, when there's a slash through them. Otherwise, there are catchy tours on the beat. So you can hear me, I'm kind of undecided there, and I apologize for that. It'd be better if it was all the same way. Not so a matter of right or wrong, but a matter of taste. And I think when it comes to personal taste, the performance tradition behind this piece is that we play those grace notes ahead of the beat. And so we published the second movement here as well, and I believe this is the final piece we have in group 1. So same sonatina. The second movement, he titles it Romance. 6/8 time, really neat articulation. Oops, let's go back here. 2 pages long, and maybe this one I'll throw the second page up for you to watch today. So you can see the first there, 6/8 time, lots of articulation. And I'll let you see the second page as we come into that there. Well, think about the form in this one too, what it could be. I think a rondo when I hear that. It sounds like an ABA, even though it's just ABA, then we've got this coda on the end. We could also call it exposition, development, recapitulation if you wanted. But either way, I think with the second movement, it's better to stick with rondo and give students that terminology and how that works. We've got this nice fermata at the bottom, a little cadenza-like portion going into the final recap or the final statement of A. But then you get this lovely 8 bars here to almost longer than a 12-bar coda, which really sounds like Beethoven, where he takes in parts of that main theme and weaves it together, and you get this really satisfying conclusion at the end. So I think students will really like this. They'll really like these classical pieces in the grade 3 level. We don't have quite as many Baroque pieces in this album, we realize, but that's by design. I think in terms of the amount of pages we have, modern students, it's getting a little bit harder to sell them on Baroque music at times. We think they will naturally gravitate to the classical music a little bit more, and then it leaves us more space to develop the contemporary side, which we're going to get into next week here. We have a mazurka attributed to Szymanowska, Repertoire, Edwige Chrétien. We've got lots of women composers here. Bella Bartok, you can see modern composers from Canada, Kevin Gibson, an arrangement of Amazing Grace we'll get into, Grachaninov, more Grachaninov, really neat pieces here that you don't see too often. Saskatchewan composer Jesse Brown, Brock Chark from the US, who we featured before. Some Russian music here, Tchaikovsky included. Lee Evans, another one of his pieces that's published for the first time here. Angelina Gibson, Andrew Harbridge himself, Lynette Sawatsky, and Wendy Edwards. Beardall Norton. You can see here at the back we've got our biographies of all the composers. And so that's what we'll get into next time. I'll play in 2 weeks' time on Friday the 15th. I'll play through Group 2 so you can see what that's all about. Today, though, it was nice to play through the Group 1 and give you an idea of how that all looks and what the styles are, etc. If anyone has any questions that's here in the Zoom room, feel free to throw those in the chat box. And those of you that are watching after the fact on YouTube, thanks for joining in to check out this summary. It's my pleasure to offer these little partly tutorials and partly repertoire session. And as we get through the grades, I'll talk a little bit more to give you pedagogical insights from time to time on how we're listening, and try and give you little thought-provoking things to help guide your teaching a little bit if you like that, or if you just want to bounce these ideas back to me, feel free to do that. Feel free to email me anytime as well. So I'm not seeing any questions at the moment, so I think what we'll do is we'll stop the live stream now. Thanks to those of you who are watching on YouTube today. Watch your inbox in 2 weeks' time. I probably won't send out an email next week, but the week after. And we'll come back to Mosaics grade 3 here in 2 weeks' time. And then again at the end of the month, with Dr. Aaron Parks. Quick question though here from Sue regarding pedal. How is that judged in exams? Depends. It really depends nowadays, because if we're hearing exams online, it's really hard to understand the pedal, and the pedal can obscure things so quickly because the students are generally, some of them are trying to use iPhones and iPads. We're trying to discourage that. We're trying to use laptops because we can get Zoom to work a little better that way. Most iPads and iPhones, if you can't find the original sound option in Zoom, it's just not going to work at all. I had a student like that yesterday. It took us 10 minutes to set them up with their desktop. So in terms of pedal, if a student is live, which very few are, of course we're judging it away in classical music where it's probably not necessary at this level. For me, classical music and baroque music, we're off the pedal. The foot may be there, but it's not used much. I use it mainly at the ends of cadences and things. Chord, as I did at the end of the Beethoven there. Go back and listen to that. You'll hear me adding shots of color so the piano is not sounding so dry. But most otherwise at this level, I think it's just simply no pedal. On an exam though, to really answer your question, if a pedal's starting to obscure the resonance, where the resonance is too cloudy, then we make mention of that. It's going to affect the assessment a little bit. And so I think the best guidance in terms of this early music with pedal is start with no pedal and just add little bits here and there. It's more in the contemporary music where you're going to be using more of a legato pedal. And so we're looking for that. And so what we often comment in terms of the exam is, how is the pedal managing the resonance? And the bottom line is, online, that's hard to hear. You have to be really careful. Unless you're going through an external mic like I am, hooked up to a sound module, I can pedal the way I want and you're probably going to be able to hear it okay. But even in this environment, a little bit of pedal will go a long way to sounding distorted through the microphone. If we're live, you can use sparing pedal, but not too much. So it's got to be something where the pedal is managing the resonance appropriately for the style that we're after. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, and Sue seems happy with that description. Okay, another good question here, and this comes back to how I started this webinar series in September. I mentioned that with my students, I take a lot of time at the beginning levels, lots of pieces. How many years would you expect to get to level 3? Wow, that's a good question. I love this question, thanks for it, and I'm happy to answer this every week, every time out. So with my own students, and I know a lot of teachers do this, I've talked to them about it, but if you get to grade 1 too quickly so that they can't read well, they're not going to last long. Unless you dive into the more modern approach where you're doing more rote-based activities, which some of my students I do. They can't read. They're not suited to reading. I want to bring a guest on in the new year that'll talk us through that a little bit. I think it's something we've all had to consider at some point. Hey, these students, this particular student can't read, and it doesn't suit them. What do I do with them? So let's assume a student can read, or maybe they're a little bit deficient. I find in my student, I've been teaching for over 35 years now. It's not the same in the last 10 as it was 30 years ago. I used to be able to teach pretty much every student to read and would insist on a certain number of pieces before we move on to another level using beginner methods, etc. I find I still have to do that, but I'm always questioning it because I never know when a student's going to suddenly hit a roadblock with their reading. And so I use a method that we have 6 books total over 3 levels, an American method, before we get to grade 1, and I've had to fine-tune that over the years. And so that typically takes 2 to 3 years if a student's practicing for me to be happy with them in the grade 1 book. And I don't want them in the grade 1 book until my method has them moving around the keyboard freely, so that when we get to the grade 1 book, we're not freaking out because nothing's in a position. And that's difficult. Our prep book, which I outlined a couple of weeks ago, is really good for that, I think, in terms of starting to get a student out of position. But I think any method book you have is going to do that. Let's say Faber and Faber, Piano Adventures. I used to use that method. I would go through, I went through something else first, but I'd get them into book 2A, Performance and Lessons book, and then 2B, Performance and Lessons book before going to grade 1. A little bit of overkill perhaps there, but by the time they got to grade 1, they could move around the keyboard without a position and be comfortable. And so in my series then, it was like 8 books to get to grade 1. I was able to cut that down and change methods and get it down to 6 books over 3 levels, and they could get to grade 1 where I feel they're pretty comfortable. That takes 2 to 3 years. And then how to get to grade 3 from there. In grade 1, I used to like to see students learn 30 pieces in grade 1. I've cut that dramatically now. I'd say 20 to 24 pieces to get through grade 1 to consider doing an exam. to get them ready so that by grade 2 they could survive. And again, the idea when you get to grade 1 or grade 2 is I don't want them to spend 3 weeks learning a piece by reading it. I want them to be able to read the piece in a week or two. Otherwise, we're going to lose them. If they don't have that skill, it's going to be such a drag. And we get some of those students, and I see a lot of students coming from other teachers where they haven't had that background. They feel like they're in grade 2 or 3, but it takes months to learn the music. Going in and having an honest conversation with them and saying, hey, can we go back and I don't say it's filling in the gaps, but can we go back and slow down a little bit? Not slow down, but can we go back and just read through a bunch of stuff to increase your reading skill? I think that's really important. I'm going to switch my sound so you can hear me a little easier. And so to get to grade 3, it's usually about a year and a half to get through grade 1 at that pace. And then grade 2, things pick up a little bit. Maybe 20 pieces does it, or 18 pieces. I used to say 2 dozen. And then to get to grade, that may take 2.5 years once they get to grade 1 to get to grade 3. But then once they get to grade 3 with that background, I generally find that grade 3 and 4 go pretty quick. Maybe it's only 8 months for grade 3 and 8 months for grade 4. Next thing you know, they're in grade 5, and it's pretty legit. Depends on their brain. Their brain doesn't develop in a linear fashion, right? The young brain kind of does this over time. It'll go from and then all of a sudden you get this exponential growth, usually over a summer. Things have been incubating, nothing going on. They come back to academic subjects, and they're just suddenly so much more capable. Sometimes they come back and they're not. They're stuck in a regression sometimes. So you work through that regression, find ways to fill the gaps until that brain's ready to come up. Sometimes that takes 2 years to get to the next level. I've had some transfer students at grade 5 recently in the last few years. We worked through grade 5 for a couple of years to fill in some gaps. Scrape into grade 6. Grade 6 is a real grind. They grind it out for 2 years to learn 18 pieces, or no, let's say 15 pieces. Do a grade 6 exam, 2 years through grade 7, and then all of a sudden grade 8 goes a lot more smoothly, and they're capable again that way where they can get through in a grade a year. But it's really the grade a year thing that I think we got to reconsider and be careful about. It's very much in our culture in Canada, and from what we see examiners in the field, it's very detrimental. I think we're losing students a lot easier. I'll put together some stats someday so you can see the numbers of how many students do grade 1 exam, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5. Big drop off at grade 5. And then of course we're trying to squeeze them into grade 8 often by the end of high school. And these days it's just not realistic for most students. It still happens, but we see a lot of students still skipping grade 7 to achieve that and then scoring 72 on that grade 8 exam, and they're not happy. And so their confidence is down. Maybe their confidence is down for life. So, I like talking about this. I won't get into too much more detail. It's already quite a bit. Sue's asking, what method do I use now? I use the Hal Leonard piano method. I think pedagogically, it depends who's analyzing it. Hal Leonard piano method, I've talked to pedagogues in the US, and it rates very highly there. They really like it, and I understand why they like it. Other pedagogues, it rates rather low for different reasons. What I like about it is the biggest strengths for that method are, number one, the backing tracks. They're the best backing tracks in the industry in terms of sound, sound triggers for how the student can respond rhythmically. So I get all my students to download backing tracks to those books right from day one. There's improv embedded into the method. They're very careful about how they approach the staff. And when they get onto the staff, the thumbs are side by side and they're always moving through a different key so that there's no single finger getting attached to a particular key early on. So it forces them to read the letter name as well as the interval. But it's these backing tracks that they can go home with, and I challenge them within the lesson every time to be able to keep up to the backing track so their ears are more open. So especially the young learner, but even some of my older students that I use the adult method with Hal Leonard with, when we start focusing too much with the eyes and the reading, that takes a lot of musical resources, and the brain doesn't have much left to listen. We put that backing track on it, it reinforces the ear to listen. It's a more efficient musical pathway, and I just love the results I'm getting. I don't have to coach counting or rhythm very much. And I find most young students don't understand the math behind counting. And so this is a great way to get them to respond rhythmically. They play really rhythmically, really strong rhythmically, and I feel like I can get them to grade 1 a little faster. The page is uncluttered. The pedagogy makes sense. The music's attractive, but these backing tracks are just like gold, and the way they approach the staff is good. So that's why I've used that method for about 20 years now, and I find it works really well. I don't know if it's for everybody. There's a lot of really great methods out there. You just have to find something you like and stick with it, or find ways to blend it into other things. And then the other thing I've started using is the Piano Adventure series, which I've got right here. We had the Piano Adventures people on last year, and I hope to have them on again in the new year. They do a really great job with their method. What I'm using this for lately, experimenting with the rote pieces. They have a bunch of rote pieces that they've written out for the teacher. So I teach the student the music by rote, and we do a little bit of rote playing in every lesson, where I'm playing a duet, and they don't have to read the music. Reading the music is so tiring, it seems, for the young students these days. If I can close the book and show them by rote a really attractive piece, some of them are quite lengthy and elaborate, and they love the challenge of spending 2 months learning this piece and being able to perform it. It sounds great when I'm playing in the background. So that's my main supplement now, is this. And then anything else with backing tracks, really. Sometimes I throw American Popular Piano Book 1 on and we do improvising. So those are sort of the methods I'd use as well. And I see Sue's saying the Christopher Norton's backing tracks do exactly. Anything with a backing track, get their ears open. So fascinating discussion. I'm going to stop the YouTube stream there now. Glad you could all listen in on this. I'll hit your inboxes here in 2 weeks' time with registration links for the upcoming webinars in November, December. Hope you can join us Saturday, November 23rd for the convocation. I'm going to host it here from my studio online, and we're going to talk with people